Have you ever had anyone angry at you for making too many cookies?
Impossible!
Katie, you've known me a long time, and you know that I can be a little bit obsessive.
I would say more like thorough.
Well, last year, I decided to get thorough on a batch of chocolate chip cookies.
How thorough?
Really thorough. You see, I didn't just want good cookies, I wanted the best cookies. I'm talking cookies with those crisp, buttery, toffee-like edges. Chocolate chip cookies with those moist centers that you break open to reveal oceans and rivers of chocolate. I'm talking chocolate chip cookies with those craggly tops and the salt. The most playful sprinkle of salt. Just enough to give you that elusive sweet and savory balance.
Maybe obsessive really is the better word here.
Cookies do have strange powers over me. The real issue was that when I was developing my recipe, I had a hard time figuring out exactly what each ingredient was doing for the end result.
Right, like does more sugar equal a crisper cookie? What about brown sugar versus white sugar?
And what about incorporating the chocolate, or what about the type of flour you use?
So how many cookies did we make? Are we talking dozens, hundreds of cookies?
We are talking thousands of cookies, actually 1,536.
With that many cookies, I know you got answers.
I sure did, Katie. And today I am going to share with you my cookie secrets. I'm Kenji Lopez-Alt.
And I'm Katie Quinn.
And on this episode of the Food Lab, Cookie Secrets. Let's break it down step by step, starting with exactly what happens when a cookie bakes.
Chocolate chip cookies start as balls of dough. The first thing they do when they hit the oven is start to spread.
Right, as the butter softens, the cookies spread more and more until eventually the edges are so thin and hot that they'll actually cook. The proteins in the flour and the eggs set, and this defines the outer edge of the cookie.
Meanwhile, baking soda and baking powder dissolve in water that's been freed up by the melting butter. This releases carbon dioxide gas, which causes the cookie to rise and creates that open, tender structure.
Next, proteins continue to set throughout the cookie, which gives the cookie a good approximation of its final shape and size. At the same time, sugars will begin to caramelize, which create those nice, sweet, rich flavors.
Sugar's not the only thing that's browning. Proteins in the egg and flour interact with carbohydrates in a process that's called the Maillard reaction. This is what causes those deep, nutty butterscotch flavors, and more on that later.
And we're not through yet. Once the cookies come out of the oven, there's more magic that happens. So a nice hot cookie is good, but for my money, I want a cookie that's been fully cooled.
That's what allows those sugars that melted during baking to firm up again, creating that nice, crisp, toffee-like structure.
Right, so why don't we start right there with the sugar? We all know that different types of sugar have varying levels of sweetness, but there's a lot more to sugar than sweetness alone.
Right. Table sugar is sucrose, which is comprised of one glucose molecule and one fructose molecule, all bound together in one large disaccharide. This right here, that's sucrose.
Now, white table sugar is sucrose, which is very mildly hygroscopic, and that means that it likes water. It's also got a pretty neutral pH.
Brown sugar also has a lot of sucrose, but in addition, it has individual glucose and fructose molecules mixed in addition to some trace minerals, and those minerals give brown sugar its characteristic molasses flavor and slightly acidic pH.
Right, and more importantly, fructose and glucose are called inverted sugars. That means that they've been released from their sucrose bonds. Now, inverted sugars are way, way more hygroscopic than sucrose. These guys just love water.
See what we're getting at here? That love of water has a huge impact on the final texture of your cookies.
We've got 3 identical batches of cookies here, except for one thing. These ones were made with 100% white sugar, these were 100% brown sugar, and these were made with 100% corn syrup, which is a pure inverted sugar syrup.
You can already see with the corn syrup cookies that they're much more pliant and almost doughy.
Right, almost cakey actually, and that's because they retain so much moisture as they bake. Meanwhile, the white sugar cookies are super crisp, while the brown sugar cookies are somewhere in between.
Personally, I like my cookies crisp around the edges but still moist in the center, and that's exactly what a 50-50 mix of brown sugar and white sugar will get you. So if you like your cookies chewier or crispier, well, you know what to do. So we may have gotten a little ahead of ourselves here. Cookies are sweet, but they really start with butter, and the way butter is incorporated into the dough can actually have a huge impact on the final texture.
Most cookie recipes start with a process called creaming, and that's where you combine the butter and the sugar in the bowl of a stand mixer or in a regular bowl, and then beat it with a wooden spoon or a paddle. As the sugar dissolves into the butter softens, and the whole thing whips up into a light, creamy mixture.
So the idea here is twofold. Dissolving the sugar helps it caramelize, and incorporating air helps keep it light instead of dense and flat.
Right, I actually made a batch of cookies that I made with completely melted butter, just to show you what happens when almost no air gets incorporated into the dough. As you can see, dense and short.
So butter adds flavor, but is there a way to get even more flavor out of it?
Butter, even though it looks uniform, actually consists of a few different elements.
First, we've got the butter fat. Most butter is made of between 80 and 83% butter fat. We've got about 15% water. And finally, about 3% milk protein.
And it's those milk proteins that we really care about because those are the things that are gonna brown and add flavor as we heat them.
So to brown butter, you put your butter in a saucepan over medium-high heat. Melt the butter, swirling the pan constantly. Continue to cook until the butter starts to brown and gets that nutty, rich aroma. As soon as it's reached a golden brown, pour it into a heat-proof bowl to stop the cooking.
There are two problems that browning butter gives you. The first is that it completely eliminates all of the water content, and that's a problem because it makes it hard to dissolve the sugar. The second is that, as we know, you can't incorporate melted butter into your cookies because they come out dense and short. So we're gonna kill two birds with one stone by adding some ice. That's gonna simultaneously cool the brown butter while also adding back some of that lost water content.
Just make sure to put the brown butter back into the fridge until it cools completely.
Now we get to what is perhaps the biggest, most controversial question when it comes to chocolate chip cookies.
We're gonna add the chocolate chips.
Actually, we're not.
We're not?
No, what we're gonna add is a lot better. We're gonna take real chocolate bars and chop them up by hand. You see, chocolate chip cookies, the chocolate chips are pretty boring. They're all exactly the same size. Meanwhile, chopped chocolate comes in a whole variety of textures. You're gonna have everything from these giant chunks that turn into big caves of melted chocolate all the way down to this chocolate dust, which streaks its way around the dough. All right, now Katie, if you would add the chocolate to the dough, please.
With pleasure. And so now that we've added half a pound of the good chocolate, we're ready to bake, right?
Wrong. What we're ready to do is cover the dough, put it in the fridge, and then go take a bath, maybe watch a MacGyver marathon, play some video games, win some Super Mario, basically anything that's gonna keep you occupied for the next 12 hours because that's how long you have to stay busy not touching that cookie dough.
Why the long wait? Well, it all started with a New York Times article in 2008 about Jacques Torres, Mr. Chocolate himself, who recommended letting the dough rest. Believe it or not, this makes a huge difference in the final flavor of your cookie.
Now, let's say that these Lego structures represent the proteins and starches in your flour. Now, your eventual goal is to break them down piece by piece and then reconstruct them into brand new shapes. And that's what's gonna give your cookies complex flavor. It's called the Maillard reaction, and it happens every time you brown food.
But deconstructing those Legos just to reconstruct them again is a tedious task. That's where enzymes come in. During the course of our overnight rest, those enzymes go to town on the starches and proteins, breaking them down left and right.
So, by the time the lights come back on in the morning, half of our job has already been done for us, which means that we can focus our entire time in the oven on building more and more of those flavorful molecules.
And that is why these cookies are gonna be so damn good.
I've got here a bowl of cookie dough that's been rested overnight, which means that we're ready to scoop it up and bake it. I like to use a 1-ounce ice cream disher, make it into balls like this, put them in my hand, and then because I like my cookies extra craggly on top, I actually break the balls open and turn them inside out before putting them on the tray.
We put them on a lined, rimmed baking sheet and then put them in the oven at 325 degrees until they just get brown around the edges but still soft in the center.
12 to 15 minutes later, as we take them out, we add a little bit of salt. I know that chocolate and salt is overdone, but that's because it's so damn tasty.
Putting a little bit of coarse sea salt on them just as they come out of the oven will make them better.
You might even say that the secret ingredient is salt.
We're talking about the secret ingredient is love, right?